If the trees could talk, what would they tell you? The first time I heard that question was 20 years ago when I stood in the back of Auschwitz leading a group of high school teenagers to Poland, and the tour guide told us, while the people are not here, the trees still are. And if those trees could talk, what would they tell us? If those trees could talk 90 days ago, what would they tell us? And we know while the people are no longer there, a lot of the trees also are no longer there. A few moments ago, the cantor welcomed in the new month of Shvat on Thursday morning. And of course, in that month, we celebrate the festival, the New Year of the Trees, Tu B'Shvat. But for this rabbi who grew up in upstate New York, and if you look at the weather in upstate New York today, a foot of snow, literally, Tu B'Shvat never made sense to me. Hashkedia porachat, the almond tree blooming, the birds chirping on January 25th, doesn't make sense. But as I got older, I understood Tu B'Shvat wasn't for upstate New York, and it wasn't for Florida, and it wasn't for California. But Tu B'Shvat, as we know, is for the land of Israel and the people of Israel. And perhaps it's no coincidence that this morning, when we introduced this month of Shvat, we are also introduced to our greatest leader, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses. We all know the story from our elementary school days, that Moses' mother cannot take care of him any longer because of fear of the Egyptians, and where does she have to throw him? Into the Nile River? But she does not. What does she do? She places him, and if you look at the words in the Torah, she places him in the Hebrew word called suf, which we translate as reeds. But what exactly are reeds? Sforno, the Italian commentator, says, a reed is a type of flowering plant in the grass family. Why? Why did she not put him in the Nile, but rather in the reeds, almost on the shores of the Nile? Because she thought that this would qualify as if she had obeyed the Egyptians and threw the baby in the Nile. And so, in essence, this word suf, in the reeds, it's a middleness. It's the substance in between the shores and the water. But really, it's the middleness. It's the substance in between death and life. A little further in, and we would never have had Moses our leader. And fast forward a little further into the story when Moses is taking care of his father-in-law Yitro's flock, and he hears the voice of God. But he does not look up into the heavens, but rather he looks in and down into a bush, the sneh. V'hasneh einenu ukal. And this burning bush was not consumed. Where was the first revelation of God? In a tree, in a plant. But what type of plant? Not the beautiful palm trees we see around here, but rather Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai tells us, why did God speak not on most high, but rather down on the lowest of low? Because just as this bush was the thorniest, lowliest bush in the world, any bird that would have entered that bush would not get out with tearing apart its limb. So true would the slavery of Egypt be for the Jewish people. So oppressive that they would not go out without a scar. And so we learn that through the image of this bush that God identifies with the people through the image of the low. But also, where was God found? The Torah tells lavat eish, in the fire, but lavat means in the heart of the fire. That within that tree, there is that presence of the divine. And because of that presence, it will not be destroyed. And how true it is of our people, who were about to, in the book of Exodus, enter the most intense slavery, but they too would not be consumed. And so today, thousands of years later, this time 80 years after the Holocaust, one of the darkest times in our entire Jewish history, The cantor announced a new month. And what are we supposed to do in that new month? It is a mitzvah, it is an obligation and responsibility to plant a tree, to create again, to have the responsibility for the land and the people to bloom. If you've ever been to Har Herzl in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, Mount Herzl, you of course see all of the prime ministers buried in one place. But there's one prime minister that you will not find there. David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister. Ben-Gurion is buried in a place called Sde Boker. It's in the middle of the Negev. It's in the middle of the desert because Ben-Gurion had a dream that we all know. And what was that? To see the desert bloom. He believed that if that desert could bloom, we would have a future. That we had to plant those trees. Today, the earth is scorched and burnt. But just like that bush thousands of years ago, it was not and will not be consumed. Because God's voice is balavat eish, in the heart of that fire. And the voice from within that most lowly bush still tells us, we can, we must, and we will plant again. Because remember what I just said, if it were not for a plant on that shore of the Nile, we would have no Moses. And if it were not for that lowliest tree, we would not have the voice of God in our lives. You may not be aware, but there are in fact different rules for trees in the land of Israel than there are for trees here. We have 2 lemon trees in the backyard, and when they're ready, we just go out and we pick those lemons and use them in our kitchen. But in Israel, if you plant a tree for 3 years, you are not supposed to take from its fruit. It's the mitzvah called orla. We treat this tree as a sacred act. And at the age of 3, we can finally use its fruit. And the rabbis do a beautiful thing. They say it's not just trees of the earth, but it's the human beings of this world that act as trees. And so you may have heard or been present, or even for your own children, have an upshurin. We call it a haircutting. But it really represents what the Kabbalists explain in the book of Jeremiah, that the human being will be like a tree planted near water. Because a tree needs 4 things to survive. Soil for its roots, eish, fire, meaning light, air, neshama, breath, and water, mayim. And that's what we need too. We need the soil, the foundations of our community together. We need fire, meaning the warmth of the community. We need neshama, we need a soul. And we don't simply need water to quench our thirst, but Torah, in so many different ways in our tradition, is called mayim. It quenches our spiritual thirst. Over these last 90 days, Rabbi Guzik and I in the Sinai Temple clergy could not have been prouder to see the mitzvot that we have done as a community, not here, but for the people in the land of Israel. From purchasing 2 IDF ambulances, one which carried a hostage home from Gaza, from so many of you visiting Israel again and again and again, using financial resources, donating clothes and equipment for soldiers, writing cards. The list goes on and on. But today we are going to begin to fulfill this mitzvah of Shvat. We must and we can make that desert bloom once again. And so, Nora, as you have encouraged us for so many years, plant those trees. Each Shabbat, we give 2 trees in honor of the bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah here at Sinai Temple on behalf of JNF USA, Jewish National Fund. And we pray that one day those children will go find those trees. But it's hard to find 2 trees. It's much easier to find a full forest. And so, Nora, for your bat mitzvah project, you encourage us, and you already have, to plant a grove of trees on behalf of your celebration. And I was going to stand here and say we're going to have $5,000 and have a grove of trees, but before Shabbat I looked and we're already more than halfway there. And so we're going to do more than that. We're going to encourage each of us to fulfill that mitzvah. Just as Moses could not have believed thousands of years ago when he was put into the trees, when Moses looked into that lowly tree and found the voice of God, we too will be responsible for allowing Israel to bloom again. Nora, you personally have been responsible for making that desert bloom and allowing each one of us to be our own tree, nurtured and warmed by community, and always seeking to learn more. We are more than halfway there. And so after Shabbat, if you're sitting here, or many of you who will turn on this sermon after Shabbat, after Havdalah, you'll get a link. It's as simple as that. Make the desert bloom. Let's create that forest that will be planted in the Eshkol region. It's the southern region of Israel near the Gaza border. Because remember, Adam and Eve came into this world into a garden, into a paradise. Moses came into this world surrounded by plants. Let us once again create the garden where leadership and the people of Israel can flourish and where Torah can be taught. What would the trees tell us if they could talk? It is the trees that have witnessed our history. And if it is those trees that we will plant that will be our witness for the generations to come, then it's up to us today and tomorrow and beyond to begin planting. Let us celebrate this Tu B'Shvat holiday together. Shabbat Shalom.